The pounding on the door was as loud as if my house had just been raided. I opened it, and there stood the man, red-faced, holding a stack of papers, as if he had the power of life and death. In this neighborhood, he was screaming about a non-conforming window, as if I had just erected an illegal fortress behind him. The crowd of neighbors stood watching as if they were enjoying a show, and his wife was grinning, broadcasting live as if she were about to witness a trial. Every look, every word was directed at me. I knew the non-conforming window was just an excuse. They wanted me to bow my head, admit my mistake in front of the crowd. But I was no easy prey. I just smiled, not to appease. It was a warning, and from that moment on, I knew the game had begun. They just didn't realize it yet. They had just made the most wrong first move. My name is Michael Thompson, 45, and I recently retired after 20 years as a city building inspector, where I saw every trick in the book when it came to property disputes and building code violations. I moved to Pine Valley 6 months ago, hoping for a peaceful retirement. What I didn't expect was that 52-year-old Rick Morrison, a mid-level manager at an insurance company, had been elected evidence by a single vote, when no one else had bothered to run for office the year before. Rick and his wife Karen had lived here for 15 years, considering themselves unofficial community leaders and self-appointed guardians of neighborhood standards. Karen ran an online neighborhood watch group with 200 members, posting photos of fence violations, off-color house paint, and even slightly misplaced cars, turning the neighbors into her personal surveillance network. The conflict began when I installed a large picture window in my living room to enjoy the backyard garden view, a simple home improvement that any reasonable person would consider perfectly normal, according to HOA regulations from 2018. All architectural changes require prior approval, though nobody had bothered to enforce this rule for years, until Rick decided to make an example of me. However, there was something Rick didn't know. I'd thoroughly reviewed every document in the property records and discovered several very interesting details that would soon turn his little power trip into a nightmare he'd never forget. After Rick delivered his ultimatum that morning, I politely said I'd consider my options, while maintaining perfect composure despite his theatrical performance. Instead of removing the window, I installed 4 high-definition security cameras around my property, which Karen immediately live-streamed with the caption, "Uncooperative neighbor installs surveillance to spy on us." The irony was delicious. She was complaining about being watched while literally broadcasting my private property to hundreds of people online. Rick began his email campaign the very next day. Day 1 brought a friendly reminder about community standards and the importance of architectural harmony. Day 2 escalated to an official warning. Complete with citations from the HOA, each email copied the entire HOA mailing list of 87 households clearly designed to publicly shame me into submission, while positioning Rick as the strong leader, protecting community values. I responded to each message with identical simplicity, received currently, researching applicable laws. My calm responses seemed to infuriate Rick even more, as he'd clearly expected either immediate capitulation or explosive anger that would justify his aggressive tactics. Meanwhile, I began my real work, meticulously reviewing HOA bylaws, property deeds, building permits, and legal documents dating back to 1995, when the development was established. The deeper I dug into county records and state databases, the more ammunition I gathered for what was becoming an inevitable showdown. Karen took to social media like a duck to water, posting, "Some people think they're above the law. Michael Thompson refuses to follow community guidelines that protect all our property values. What should we do?" The post received 47 likes and 23 comments within hours, mostly supporting Rick and Karen's position, with neighbors chiming in about the importance of rules and community standards. Several neighbors began avoiding eye contact during morning walks, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension, but unwilling to take sides publicly. Rick appeared at my house again 3 days later, this time armed with measuring tools and a digital camera, photographing my window from every conceivable angle, like some kind of architectural crime scene investigator. He brought witnesses, including Betty from number 15, a retired teacher who'd apparently appointed herself as the neighborhood's expert on architectural aesthetics and property value protection. Betty examined my window with the intensity of an art critic reviewing a controversial sculpture. This window completely destroys our neighborhood's architectural unity, Betty declared dramatically, as if presenting closing arguments to a Supreme Court jury. The size is wrong, the style doesn't match, and it sets a dangerous precedent for other residents who might think they can just change whatever they want. Rick nodded solemnly, treating Betty's amateur architectural criticism as if it were expert testimony from a licensed professional. I watched this performance from inside my house, occasionally waving cheerfully at the growing crowd of spectators. My calm demeanor seemed to frustrate them even more. They'd clearly expected defensive arguments or angry confrontations that would justify their escalating tactics. Instead, I continued my methodical research into property records, building permits, and legal precedents, while they exhausted themselves with increasingly desperate theatrics. The weekend community barbecue brought a new level of orchestrated social pressure. Multiple families gave my wife Lisa and me the silent treatment, with mothers literally steering their children away from us, as if we carried some kind of contagious disease. Rick made several loud comments within earshot. Some people who don't respect our community values don't deserve our friendship or support. But the message was clear. Conform complete social ostracism. Karen worked the crowd like a politician, spreading her version of events and gathering support for Rick's strong leadership in protecting neighborhood standards. She painted me as a wealthy outsider who thought money could buy the right to ignore rules that everyone else followed. Her social media posts during the barbecue showed smiling neighbors standing together against bullying and protecting our community values. Lisa started feeling the pressure intensely. "Just remove the window, honey," she pleaded that evening. "Why make this so complicated? It's not worth destroying our relationships with everyone in the neighborhood." I understood her frustration. She wanted peace and friendship with our neighbors, not this constant tension and drama. "Trust me," I replied, showing her the growing stack of documents I'd printed. "This isn't really about the window. Rick has no idea what he's stepping into." Karen's online campaign intensified with a new post. "Michael Thompson now has 4 security cameras. Is this a residential neighborhood or a prison compound? Are we supposed to feel safe with someone surveilling our children and families?" The post went viral within the community group, garnering 89 likes and dozens of comments expressing concern about privacy and safety. The irony was staggering. Karen was complaining about surveillance while literally live streaming people's private conversations and activities. Rick decided to increase pressure by hiring an attorney to send threatening letters, while simultaneously announcing my suspension from common area privileges, meaning no pool, gym, or tennis court access until I complied with HOA demands. The attorney's letter was full of legal-sounding threats about continuing violations, community standards, and potential litigation for damages to property values. It was clearly designed to intimidate someone without legal knowledge into immediate submission. But Rick's campaign took a sinister turn when I returned from grocery shopping to discover my window had been hit by a rock, creating a spiderweb crack in one corner. My security cameras captured a hooded figure throwing from the street, though the face wasn't clearly visible due to the angle and lighting conditions. The timing seemed awfully convenient, just hours after Rick's attorney had threatened escalating consequences for noncompliance. Lisa called the police immediately. Officer Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, examined the damage and took a detailed report, but explained the difficulty of identifying the perpetrator due to unclear facial features in the recording. However, he did note that the rock had been thrown with considerable force and accuracy, suggesting someone familiar with the property layout rather than a random vandal passing by that evening. Rick called personally with what he probably thought with subtle intimidation. "I heard about your window damage, Michael. Quite unfortunate. Perhaps it's a sign you should have followed the rules from the beginning, instead of causing all this unnecessary trouble for everyone." His tone carried barely concealed satisfaction, as if the vandalism proved his point about consequences for non-compliance. I recorded that entire conversation, along with his follow-up comment. Sometimes the community has ways of expressing its displeasure when certain individuals refuse to be good neighbors. Karen then posted a video on social media, pointing directly at our house while saying, "Some people think money can buy the right to break rules that protect everyone else's property values and quality of life. But actions have consequences, and the community is watching." The video received dozens of supportive comments from neighbors praising Karen's bullying, and protecting community standards. Meanwhile, my research had uncovered a treasure trove of information that would soon turn Rick's power trip into a legal catastrophe. Sarah Williams, my personal attorney and real estate specialist, whom I'd worked with for 10 years during my city inspector days, confirmed my suspicions. Within 3 hours of reviewing the docu, this HOA was never officially registered with the state government. They have no legal standing to impose fines, suspend services, or enforce any of their so-called regulations. 20 years of building inspection experience had taught me to always check the foundational documents first, and Rick's little kingdom was built on legal quicksand. Furthermore, Sarah continued, Rick Morrison unilaterally modified the HOA bylaws in 2023 without an official meeting or member notification. State law requires at least 67% written member approval for any bylaw changes, and there's no record of any such vote or even discussion. But the real bombshell came from property deed copies from 1995, documents that had taken me 2 weeks to obtain from the old county office archives. Sarah looked carefully at the original ownership list, I said, sliding the papers across her desk. Sarah studied the documents, her eyes gradually widening in amazement. Thompson Family Trust. Michael, you've owned 40% of the land in this development since 1995. Exactly. My father purchased this property when he worked as a construction contractor planning to develop it himself before health issues forced him to lease the land to other developers. When he passed in 2019, I inherited everything through the family trust, and I chose to maintain the existing arrangements rather than disrupt people's lives. But legally, I own the underlying land under 23 of the 57 houses in Pine Valley, which means Sarah began understanding the implications. Which means the pool, gym, tennis court, and common areas that Rick just banned me from using are actually sitting on my property, and I'm technically his landlord, along with 22 other households. I finished with a smile. The cherry on top came from building permit records I'd requested from City Hall using my former inspector credentials. Rick expanded his back deck in 2022 without proper permits. I pointed to the comparison blueprints. Karen converted her garage to a studio space without any permits whatsoever under current city codes. Each violation carries a $2,000 daily fine until corrected, and both structures would need to be torn down and rebuilt to current standards. That evening brought a text from an unknown number. I'm Mike Morrison, Rick's son. Can we meet privately? I have information you need to see. Mike, 28, worked as a software engineer and had witnessed his parents' entire crusade against me. With growing disgust and embarrassment, we met at a coffee shop 2 towns over to avoid neighborhood surveillance. I apologize for my father's behavior, Mike began, his face red with shame. He's been on a power trip since becoming HOA president, and my mother's gotten completely out of control with that online group. They've turned our neighborhood into their personal kingdom, and I'm sick of watching them bully people. Mike explained that Rick had always been controlling, but the HOA presidency had unleashed his worst impulses, while Karen's social media following had fed her need for drama and attention. Are you contacting me? I asked, though I suspected Mike had discovered something significant. Because I'm a programmer, I know how to research public records and check facts. When I saw your name on the property deeds, I realized my father had made a catastrophic mistake. He has no idea who he's dealing with or what legal ground he's standing on. Mike handed me a USB drive containing explosive evidence. These are all of Dad's private emails about this situation, including his plans to make life difficult until you move away. He's been coordinating with Karen and several neighbors to escalate pressure through social isolation, harassment, and what he calls natural consequences for non-compliance. The USB also contained Karen's original video footage that she'd recorded but hadn't posted yet, including segments where she explicitly discussed the rock-throwing incident. Maybe he'll learn his lesson after someone taught him about consequences. Sometimes people need stronger motivation than just words and fines. With 72 hours remaining before Rick's final deadline, I had everything needed to completely destroy his little kingdom of imaginary power. Sarah prepared comprehensive legal documentation, I contacted former colleagues at the city inspector's office, and Mike agreed to serve as an inside witness when the moment came for public revelation. However, I didn't want private revenge. I wanted the entire community to witness the truth about their self-appointed leaders. "Sarah, can you arrange an emergency HOA meeting under state regulations?" I asked as a major stakeholder and property owner. "You absolutely have the right to demand an emergency meeting. They're legally required to organize it within 7 days or face state legislation." Intervention perfect. It's time for Pine Valley to learn who really owns what around here and what kind of people they've been following, I replied, already planning the most satisfying public education session of my career. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose years of illegal activity, abuse of power, and outright fraud. Rick had picked a fight with the wrong person, and he was about to learn that real legal authority trumps neighborhood bullying every single time. The only question now was whether he'd have any dignity left when the dust settled. Saturday morning found Pine Valley's community center packed beyond capacity with 85 households, the largest turnout in the development's history. Word had spread that this meeting would finally resolve the Michael Thompson situation, and neighbors arrived expecting to witness my public humiliation and possible expulsion from the community. Rick stood at the main podium, wearing his best black suit, gripping the microphone like a king, about to pronounce judgment on a rebellious subject. "Friends and neighbors," Rick began, his voice resonating with practiced authority. "Today we're gathered to resolve the Michael Thompson problem that has been disrupting our peaceful community for weeks. He has violated our HOA bylaws for 18 consecutive days and repeatedly refused to comply with reasonable corrective measures designed to protect all our property value." Karen sat prominently in the front row, live streaming the proceedings with the dramatic title, "Justice for Pine Valley, Final Showdown." Her phone screen displayed 47 live viewers, with comments flowing in, supporting Rick's strong leadership and demanding consequences for my selfish behavior. The audience murmured approvingly as Rick outlined my alleged crimes against community harmony. "By the authority vested in me as your elected HOA president," Rick continued, building to his dramatic climax, "and after consulting with our legal counsel, the board will proceed with immediate legal action to force Michael Thompson's compliance, or," he paused for maximum effect, "compel him to leave our community permanently." Scattered applause erupted from his supporters, while others shifted uncomfortably at the harshness of the proposed punishment. I stood calmly from the back row, my leather briefcase in hand. "Rick, may I say a few words before you proceed?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning between Rick and me like spectators at a tennis match. "Michael, this meeting is for announcing board decisions, not for debate or discussion," Rick replied curtly, clearly wanting to maintain control of the narrative. "I understand completely," I replied with a smile, "but according to Robert's Rules of Order, which your own HOA bylaws specifically reference in Article 7, Section 3, all community members have the right to present relevant information before any binding votes or decisions." Rick's face showed the first flicker of uncertainty as several neighbors nodded, recognizing the procedural fairness of my one request Rick couldn't refuse without appearing dictatorial in front of the entire community. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. 5 minutes maximum." I walked confidently to the podium, opening my briefcase with deliberate ceremony, while Rick reluctantly stepped aside. The room buzzed with anticipation as I arranged several document folders on the lectern. "Thank you, Rick, friends and neighbors. Before Rick makes his final decision about my fate, I'd like to share some fascinating information about Pine Valley HOA that I discovered during my research into this matter." I held up the first official document. "This is a certified search result from the Secretary of State's office. Pine Valley HOA has never been legally registered as a corporate entity or nonprofit organization in this state." The room erupted in confused murmurs as people processed this information. "What this means," I continued, "is that every fine imposed, every rule enforced, and every decision made by this HOA over the past 7 years has absolutely no legal validity whatsoever. You might as well have been taking orders from a neighborhood book club." Rick's face turned crimson as he attempted to interrupt. "That's just a bureaucratic technicality. We still have the inherent right to protect our community standards." But I pressed on relentlessly. Furthermore, Rick unilaterally modified the HOA bylaws in 2023 without calling an official meeting or obtaining required member approval. Under state law, this constitutes fraud and makes any subsequent actions legally void. I turned to address the crowd directly. How many of you remember being invited to vote on changes to our community bylaws in 2023? I waited as people looked around at each other in confusion. Not a single hand rose. That's because no such meeting ever occurred. Rick simply decided to change the rules to give himself more power. Bun, let's discuss building code violations, I said, opening my second folder. The room's attention was completely focused on my presentation, as Rick stood helplessly nearby, his authority crumbling with each revelation. Rick Morrison expanded his back deck in 2022 without obtaining required building permits from the city. Karen Morrison converted her garage into a studio space, also without proper permits or inspections. I activated my portable projector, displaying satellite imagery on the Community Center's wall. These are dated satellite photographs clearly showing structural changes to the Morrison property between 2021 and 2023. The deck expansion alone violates 3 separate building codes and represents approximately $15,000 in unpermitted construction. Rick finally found his voice. You have absolutely no right to investigate my private property or access my personal information. His outrage seemed to convince some neighbors that I was the one behaving inappropriately. Actually, Rick, I replied calmly, I'm using exclusively public information available to any citizen. Satellite imagery, building permit records, and proper assessments, the same type of information you use when you photographed my window and researched HOA regulations to attack me. Betty from number 15 stood up defensively, even if there are technical violations. Rick has been protecting our community values while you've been deliberately disruptive. Several people nodded in agreement. Still loyal to Rick despite the mounting evidence against him. Me to the most important issue, I said, retrieving my final folder. The question of property ownership and legal authority in Pine Valley. The room fell completely silent, sensing that something major was coming. I activated the projector again, displaying a detailed property map with color-coded lot designations. 1995, Thompson Family Trust purchased 120 acres of undeveloped land from Riverside Development Corporation for residential development. I used a laser pointer to highlight specific areas on the map. When Pine Valley was constructed, the trust entered into 99-year land leases with individual homeowners rather than selling the property outright. The implications began dawning on people as I continued. The lots highlighted in blue on this map, totaling 23 houses, including the Morrison residence at number 12, are built on land owned by Thompson Family Trust. Gasps and shocked whispers filled the room as neighbors realized what I was revealing. Furthermore, I continued, the community center where we're meeting, along with the pool, gym, tennis court, and all common areas that Rick recently banned me from using, are located on trust property. Karen's live stream captured the moment when understanding hit the crowd. Their HOA president had just tried to ban the actual landlord from using his own property. Wait, called out Mrs. Patterson from number 8. Are you saying you own the land under our houses? Not exactly, I clarified. You own your houses and have 99-year lease rights to the land, which are automatically renewable and transferable. But yes, Thompson Family Trust, which I inherited from my father in 2019, holds the underlying property rights to 40% of this development. The room exploded in shocked conversations as neighbors grappled with this revelation. Rick stood frozen at the podium, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. But I wasn't finished. Now I'd like to share some audio and video evidence of harassment and property damage, I announced, connecting my laptop to the sound system. The first recording was Rick's threatening phone call after my window was damaged.
I heard about your window damage, Michael. Quite unfortunate. Perhaps it's a sign. You should have followed the rules from the beginning.
His voice echoed through the stunned silence of the community center as neighbors heard their HOA president implicitly condoning vandalism. Next came Karen's unposted video footage provided by Mike. Maybe he'll learn his lesson after someone taught him about consequences.
With that rock, sometimes people need stronger motivation than just words and warnings.
The room erupted in lesson and shocked gasps as Karen's own words revealed her knowledge of and approval for the property damage officer Martinez, whom I had contacted before the meeting, chose that moment to enter the community center. Excuse me, folks. Michael, I finished reviewing all the evidence you submitted regarding harassment, intimidation, and property damage. We need to speak with Rick and Karen Morrison about filing formal charges. Rick desperately tried to regain control. This is obviously a setup, Michael. Has orchestrated this entire conspiracy to avoid following simple community rules that everyone else respects. But his protestations fell on deaf ears as the evidence spoke for itself. Karen had stopped her live stream and sat pale-faced in the front row, realizing that her own recorded words had just incriminated her in criminal activity. "Dad, please, stop making this worse for yourself." Everyone turned as Mike Morrison walked to the front of the room, his face filled with shame and determination. "I need to apologize to this entire community. I provided evidence to Michael because I couldn't stand watching my parents abuse their positions and bully innocent people." Mike's betrayal by his own son seemed to break Rick's remaining spirit. "These people have been illegally collecting HOA fees for 7 years. Mike continued harassing neighbors who didn't conform to their personal preferences, and now they've crossed the line into criminal behavior. Someone had to stop them. Mrs. Wilson, 73, and Pine Valley's longest-term resident slowly stood. "I move that we immediately vote Rick Morrison out as HOA president and issue a formal apology to Michael Thompson for the harassment he's endured." Seconded. Multiple voices called simultaneously from around the room. "All in favor," Mrs. Wilson called. A forest of hands shot up throughout the room. Opposed, only 3 hands rose. Rick, Karen, and Betty abstentions. 4 people remained neutral. The vote was overwhelming, 78 in favor of removing Rick from power. Rick and Karen left the community center in complete humiliation, walking through a crowd of neighbors who now saw them as criminals rather than community leaders. The immediate aftermath was swift and decisive. Within a week, Rick and Karen had resigned from all community positions and faced serious legal consequences for their actions. They were forced to return the $7,500 in illegal fines they'd collected from me, plus all unauthorized HOA fees collected since 2018, totaling $127,000 that had to be refunded to the entire community. Many neighbors who'd been paying monthly HOA fees for years were shocked to learn they'd been scammed by people they'd trusted as leaders. Officer Martinez filed formal charges against Karen for property damage and criminal intimidation. She eventually pled guilty in a plea bargain, receiving a $5,000 fine and 200 hours of community service, specifically cleaning local parks. With a court order prohibiting her from documenting her service on social media, Rick faced civil penalties for the illegal HOA fee collection and had to obtain proper building permits for his unpermitted construction, costing over $8,000 in fines and renovation work. Pine Valley organized completely transparent new elections with proper oversight and legal registration. Mrs. Patterson won the presidency with a platform promising to never abuse power or bully neighbors over petty differences. The new HOA board immediately hired Sarah Williams to draft legally compliant bylaws, focusing on genuine community improvement rather than authoritarian control. The new regulations emphasized consensus building, with all major decisions requiring 60% member approval through properly conducted votes. The HOA board was restructured as an advisory body with no authority to impose fines or restrict property access. Architectural changes would be reviewed case by case with reasonable standards, focused on safety and property values rather than rigid aesthetic conformity. As the actual property owner, I was invited to serve as an unpaid legal advisor, contributing my building code expertise and property law knowledge to help the community operate lawfully. Lisa was elected as the new HOA treasurer, bringing her accounting background to ensure transparent financial management that the community had never experienced under Rick's secretive leadership. 6 months after the showdown, Pine Valley had become an entirely different community. I used my property ownership position constructively, reducing land lease fees by 30% for lower-income families and investing the savings into upgrading common facilities that had been neglected under Rick's mismanagement. Mike Morrison became our official web developer, creating a transparent community website with complete financial information, meeting minutes, and streamlined processes for submitting architectural requests. The neighborhood's online presence was completely transformed. The old violations shaming group was replaced by Pine Valley Community Support, managed by Mrs. Patterson, with a focus on positive community building, sharing information about local events, organizing mutual aid networks for neighbors needing assistance, and celebrating personal milestones like birthdays, graduations, and new family members. Pine Valley hosted its first annual summer festival, with me donating $5,000 for food trucks and entertainment, while Mrs. Patterson organized family activities and Mike provided professional sound equipment. The celebration took place directly in front of my house, with my once controversial window serving as a beautiful backdrop for family photos, now decorated with charming lights that had become a beloved neighborhood landmark. 2 years after the window incident, I sit in my kitchen brewing morning coffee as always, gazing through the living room window that started this entire transformation. The view now encompasses the thriving community garden that replaced Karen's former surveillance posts, with neighbors working together on shared projects instead of hunting for violations. To report, Rick and Karen still live in Pine Valley, having gradually transformed from neighborhood tyrants into quiet, respectful residents. Rick volunteers maintaining the community garden website, while Karen participates in book clubs and charity drives, without any social media documentation. Their redemption arc surprised everyone, proving that even the worst bullies can change when their power is removed and they face real consequence. My phone rings with another call from an HOA president seeking advice about difficult residents. After listening to their complaints, I ask my standard questions. Are you certain you understand that residents' legal rights? Are you operating your HOA within state legal requirements? The answer is inevitably no, leading to another educational conversation about the difference between legitimate authority and neighborhood bullying. The lesson of Pine Valley is clear. Bullies only understand strength. Knowledge trumps imaginary authority, and sometimes the smallest conflicts reveal the biggest truths about power, justice, and community. My famous window still frames the most beautiful view in the neighborhood, not just of the garden outside, but of what happens when good people stand up to tyrants and transform their community forever.